Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're tracing the absolutely staggering trajectory of Colombia's most infamous drug lord, Pablo Escobar. We're going to map out his entire life story, focusing on exactly how he started, how he built an unprecedented criminal empire, and ultimately, how he got caught and killed. Let's get right into it. Okay, look at this unbelievable figure, $30 billion. That is the estimated net worth Pablo Escobar amassed by the time of his death. It's a number that's honestly hard to wrap your head around, right? It makes him one of the wealthiest conventional criminals in human history. To put that into perspective, he wasn't just rich. He had enough capital to literally challenge an entire sovereign nation. But all this begs a pretty massive question. How exactly did a petty car thief become the wealthiest criminal in history? I mean, that is a staggering leap in scale. To really understand the complete picture of his life, we have to look at how his empire snowballed from the local streets of Colombia to completely dominating the global illegal drug trade. So here is our roadmap. We're going to move chronologically, starting with his early life and first crimes, then the rise of the cartel, his era as the king of cocaine, his violent war on the state, his eventual prison escape and death, and finally, the Escobar legacy. Part 1. Early life and first crimes. We begin in the city of Medellin, Colombia, where a teenage Escobar who grew up in pretty severe poverty dropped out of school and turned to the streets to survive. Now, his criminality escalated incredibly fast. He and his gang literally started out by stealing tombstones, sandblasting the names off and reselling them. That quickly evolved into motor vehicle theft. But things drastically shifted when he turned to kidnapping. In 1971, he orchestrated the abduction of a businessman named Diego Echevarria, securing a massive $50,000 ransom. So as you can see, his crimes quickly escalated from petty street scams to highly organized, violent abductions for huge payouts. Moving on to Part 2, Rise of the Cartel. As the 1970s progressed and the cocaine trade really began to spread in Colombia, Escobar took those organizational skills he developed and pivoted straight into this booming illicit market, founding the infamous Medellin cartel. By the mid-1970s, he was already establishing supply routes from Peru, Bolivia, and Ecuador. Then, by 1978, his cartel essentially took over Norman's Cay, a whole island in the Bahamas. They bought up land, built a 1-kilometer airstrip, and even set up refrigerated warehouses just to store cocaine. It's wild. By the 1980s, this massive infrastructure fed vast distribution networks directly into South Florida, California, and Puerto Rico. And by the 1980s, the demand in the United States was so astronomical that Escobar was coordinating the monthly shipment of 70 to 80 tons of powder cocaine. Just think about that volume for a second. That incredible amount totally monopolized the trade and funneled billions of dollars directly back to Medellin. That brings us to Part 3, the King of Cocaine. The unbelievable wealth generated by those 80-ton shipments gave him unprecedented power, leverage, and influence within Colombia. Now, to understand how he actually managed this massive empire on the ground, you have to understand a brutal binary choice he offered: plata o plomo. This translates directly to silver or lead, meaning you either take his money or you take a bullet. He forced this ruthless carrot-and-stick strategy upon the government, law enforcement, and the judiciary. Let's break that down. On the silver side, he bought compliance. He funded politicians in both major political parties to pull strings for him at absolutely every level of government. But on the lead side, he ruthlessly sent hitmen to assassinate anyone who had the integrity to reject those bribes. Basically, he bought whoever he could and murdered whoever he couldn't. Yet, alongside all this violence, he carefully crafted this incredibly contradictory public image. To the poor of Medellin, he was the Paisa Robin Hood. He spent millions building housing complexes, parks, hospitals, and football pitches. This made him incredibly popular, so popular, in fact, that he was actually elected as an alternate member of the Colombian Congress in 1982. But concurrently, behind the scenes, he was acting as a narco-terrorist, funding the far-left M19 guerrilla movement to attack government targets whenever it suited his anti-extradition agenda. Which leads right into Part 4, War on the State. Obviously, that kind of tension couldn't last forever. When honest officials finally pushed back against his political ambitions and favored his extradition to the United States, which, by the way, was the one thing Escobar feared above all else, the scale of his retaliation became a full-on war against the Colombian state. He ordered the assassinations of Justice Minister Rodrigo Lara Bonilla and presidential candidate Luis Carlos Galan. He was even implicated in financing the 1985 Palace of Justice siege where 98 people died, including half of the Supreme Court justices. He planted a bomb on Avianca Flight 203, killing all 107 people aboard, and orchestrated the murder of a staggering 1,000 police officers. It was a relentless, brutal campaign of terror simply to avoid being sent to an American prison. Part 5. Prison, Escape, and Death. This extreme bloodshed eventually forced the government's hand. Desperate to stop the bombings, the Colombian government negotiated a surrender, officially banning the extradition of citizens in the 1991 Constitution. However, you have to put imprisonment in huge air quotes here, because it was highly conditional. He was confined in a luxurious, self-built private compound called La Catedral. I mean, just look at these features. It had a full football pitch, a giant dollhouse, a bar, a jacuzzi, and even a waterfall. It was less a prison and way more of a fortified resort. Furthermore, he just continued to run his criminal operations right from inside. When the media and authorities finally realized this, the government attempted to move him to a standard jail in 1992. But, of course, Escobar found out and he escaped. Following that escape in July 1992, a massive nationwide manhunt kicked off, heavily supported by U.S. technology and intelligence. After over a year on the run, on December 2nd, 1993, literally just one day after his 44th birthday, he was traced via a phone call he made to his family. Special forces cornered him in a middle-class neighborhood, and he was fatally shot in the head while attempting to escape across a Medellin rooftop. And finally, Part 6, the Escobar Legacy. With Escobar dead and the Medellin cartel fractured, Colombia was left to deal with the surreal, violent, and heavy aftermath of his entire reign. Highlighting just how deeply polarizing a figure he really was, we have this number, 25,000. That is the estimated number of people who actually attended his funeral. While the state and his countless victims saw ruthless terrorists, many of the city's poor mourned him as a saint who had provided them with homes and amenities when the government wouldn't. And shifting gears to an incredibly bizarre ecological legacy, here is a completely different number for you, 40 plus. This represents the number of hippopotamuses that existed in the wild in Colombia by 2014. Now, you might be wondering, why on earth are there hippos in Colombia? Well, Escobar originally kept 4 of them in a private zoo at his massive estate, Hacienda Nópolis. After his death, they were deemed way too difficult to seize, so they were simply left behind. These so-called cocaine hippos multiplied from those original 4, roaming the Magdalena River and creating a highly unique and honestly very challenging environmental crisis for modern Colombian authorities. As we wrap up this explainer, we're left staring at this incredibly complex dual identity. On one hand, you have the myth of the Paisa Robin Hood, who built neighborhoods. On the other, you have a narco-terrorist who murdered thousands, blew up airplanes, and held an entire nation hostage just to protect his own illegal wealth. So looking at the full, crazy scope of his life and death, we have to ask, considering his ruthless violence against his philanthropic facade, how should history ultimately remember Pablo Escobar?